There was a teaching that Jesus transmitted in secret, a knowledge so dangerous that the church preferred to erase it from history. We are not talking about sweet parables or sermons on love for one's neighbor. We are talking about an invisible war, ancient, waged not with swords but with consciousness, a war against forces that the Christian tradition called fallen angels, but that Jesus understood in a radically different way. Before being the Messiah, before the miracles and the crowds, Jesus was a man who asked questions that no one wanted to answer. And it was at a specific moment, at 28 years old, that he found something that would change everything. Jesus had left Nazareth again, not in flight but in search. He traveled to regions where traditional rabbis would never set foot, places where Persian scribes, Greek masters, and sages of forgotten traditions still guarded ancient texts. It was on one of those journeys in a hidden library in the mountains of Syria that he found the manuscripts. They were not ordinary scrolls. They were fragments of something earlier, texts that spoke about the Watchers, angels who descended to earth not to help humanity, but to dominate it. They taught forbidden knowledge, yes, but they exacted a price: worship, submission, control. The text described how these beings not only corrupted men, but created entire systems of power, false religions, hierarchies that promised salvation but delivered spiritual slavery. Jesus read it with the same intensity with which he observed injustices in the streets of Nazareth as a child. And then he understood something devastating. The fallen ones were not just figures from the past. They still operated, not in physical bodies, but through structures, through corrupted religions, through leaders who used the name of God to oppress. When he returned to Judea, Jesus was no longer the same. He began to teach, but not in the synagogues, on the margins, in houses, in places where religious power did not control every word. His closest disciples noticed the change. Peter, always direct, asked one night, "Master, you speak of liberation, but liberation from what? Everyone says Rome is the enemy." Jesus looked at the fire burning between them. His answer was slow, measured. Rome is a symptom. The empire that oppresses your bodies is visible, but there is another empire, invisible, that oppresses your souls. There are powers that do not wear armor. They wear religious authority. They hide behind temples, divine laws, sacred traditions. And they have been doing this for millennia. Peter frowned. "Are you talking about the Pharisees?" "I am talking about something before the Pharisees, about those who taught the Pharisees that God loves hierarchies, that God requires intermediaries, that salvation needs to be bought, negotiated, controlled. Mary Magdalene was there. She always was. But unlike the others, she did not ask questions out of curiosity. She asked because she understood the weight of the answers. That night, it was she who spoke. "You are saying that religion itself was corrupted from the beginning. Not every religion, but many structures that call themselves religious were built by those who fell. They taught men that God is distant, that sacrifice, ritual, mediation are necessary, that sin is an unpayable debt, all lies, all control." Jesus stood up. He walked to the edge of the small camp. The night was dark, moonless. "The fallen do not want you to know the simplest truth, that God is already within you, that you do not need temples, that you do not need priests, that the kingdom is not a future reward, it is a present reality when you awaken to it." There was a long silence. Then Judas, who until that moment had been quiet, spoke in a tense voice. "If this is true, if you teach this openly, they will kill you." Jesus turned to him. "They are already trying." In the months that followed, Jesus taught this knowledge only to those closest to him, not because he was selfish, but because it was dangerous. He knew that the structures of religious power would not tolerate this message, not because it was theological heresy, but because it was political heresy. If people understood that they did not need intermediaries, the temple would lose its control. If they understood that God did not demand submission to human hierarchies, the entire structure would collapse. Mary Magdalene became the most attentive disciple, not out of blind devotion, but out of deep understanding. She asked questions that the others avoided. One afternoon, while they walked alone, she asked something Jesus expected. If the fallen created systems of control, how do we know that what you teach is not just another one? Jesus stopped. He looked at her with something close to gratitude. Because I do not ask you to follow me, I ask you to awaken. Because I do not build temples. Because I do not establish hierarchies. Because everything I teach can be verified within each one. If someone needs me to access God, then I have failed. Mary smiled slightly. That is why they fear you. Jesus nodded. For that, and because I am saying that the real battle is not against Romans or Pharisees, it is against the principles they represent. Principles planted so long ago that they seem natural. The idea that spiritual power needs hierarchy, that salvation needs punishment, that God is far away and angry, and what is the truth? That God never departed, that you are sparks of the divine trapped in systems that profit from your ignorance, that awakening to this is the only unforgivable sin in the eyes of those who control. It was Mary Magdalene who received the deepest teachings, not because she was special, but because she asked the hardest questions and did not accept easy answers. Jesus taught her about gnosis, the word that means direct knowledge. Not knowledge about God, but knowledge of God as an intimate experience without mediators. He taught her that the fallen operated through fear. Fear of sin, fear of death, fear of exclusion, and that the only weapon against this fear was the knowledge that nothing can separate them from the divine they already are. But the most dangerous teaching, the one that would be erased with the most violence by the nascent church, was this. Jesus said that the God of the Old Testament, the God of wrath and punishment, was not the true God. It was a creation of the fallen, a demiurge, a lesser God who presented himself as absolute. The true God, the Father that Jesus announced, never asked for sacrifices, never threatened, never divided humanity into the elect and the condemned. When Mary asked how he knew this, Jesus answered with devastating simplicity, because I experienced it, because I went beyond fear and doctrine, because I stopped accepting what they taught me and sought directly, and what I found bears no resemblance to what the priests preach. Tensions grew. The Pharisees began to watch Jesus more closely, not because he broke the Sabbath or ate with sinners. That was superficial scandal. The real problem was the underlying message. He was delegitimizing the entire system, saying that the temple was unnecessary, that rituals were theaters of control, that the law, when used to oppress, was a tool of the fallen, not of God. Peter, always pragmatic, tried to convince Jesus to soften the message. Master, we can say the same things in a more acceptable way, without attacking the temple directly, without talking about fallen angels and corrupted systems. Jesus looked at him with sadness. Peter, if I do that, I become just another reformer, just another who adjusts the system without questioning it. I did not come to adjust, I came to reveal, and revealing hurts because it forces people to choose, to remain in comfortable illusion or to awaken to the war. What war? Peter asked, frustrated. The war against everything that teaches us we are small, sinners, dependent, against everything that profits from our guilt, against structures that promise salvation but deliver more sophisticated chains. That is the war, and it is not fought with swords. Mary Magdalene understood before the others that Jesus was preparing his own death, not because he wanted to die, but because he knew the system would not tolerate his message. One night she confronted him. You know what is going to happen. I know. They will kill me. Afterward, they will distort everything I taught. They will turn liberation into a new religion. They will place me on a symbolic cross and say that only through my suffering is there salvation. They will rebuild exactly the system I came to dismantle. Then why continue? Because some will understand. Because the truth once spoken never dies completely. It remains on the margins in hidden texts, in questions that do not fall silent, and because you will be here to remember. Mary felt the weight of those words. You want me to preserve the teaching, I want you to preserve the question, the doubt, the refusal to accept authority that does not resonate with your own experience of the divine. That is all. When Jesus was arrested, it was not for theological blasphemy. It was for subversion. Pilate did not care about debates on the Sabbath or ritual purity, but when the Pharisees explained that Jesus was saying the religious system itself was corrupt, that he was calling the authorities servants of fallen powers, that he was freeing the people from the need for temple and priesthood. Then Pilate understood the danger. This man destabilizes the order, they said. Not just the Roman order, but the divine order that sustains empires. And Pilate, who knew well how empires work, knew they were right. Jesus was crucified not as a mystic martyr, but as a revolutionary who attacked the invisible root of power. After the crucifixion, the disciples scattered, but it was Mary Magdalene who carried the most dangerous teaching. She taught in secret, in small groups, far from the eyes of Peter and those who were beginning to build the institutional church. She said that Jesus did not die to pay for sins, but to expose the system that profits from guilt. That he did not found a new religion, but offered an exit from all religions that enslave. That the resurrection was not physical, but symbolic, an awakening to life beyond the fear of death. For decades, these teachings circulated in secret manuscripts, Gnostic Gospels, texts that spoke inconvenient truths, that Mary was the most beloved disciple, that Jesus taught direct knowledge, not blind faith, that the true enemy was never Rome, but the principles that Rome and the Temple shared: hierarchy, control, fear. Then came Constantine, the Council of Nicaea. The officialization: the church needed unity, hierarchy, control, so it did what Jesus said they would do. It turned liberation into a new prison. It declared heretical all texts that spoke of gnosis, of direct knowledge, of the unnecessity of mediators. It burned manuscripts. It persecuted entire communities. It erased Mary Magdalene from history, reducing her to a repentant prostitute. And the teaching about the fallen, rewritten, transformed into the theology of original sin, of human fall, of the need for institutional salvation. Jesus, who taught that we are already divine, was transformed into the only divine, made an exception to prove our insufficiency. For centuries the texts remained hidden, in deserts, in isolated monasteries, guarded by secret groups who knew that one day the world would be ready. In 1945, in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, jars were found. Inside, preserved manuscripts, forbidden gospels, Gnostic texts, and there, in the carefully copied words, the voice of Jesus saying what the church had silenced: that the kingdom is within, that we do not need external saviors, that the real war is against systems that convince us of our smallness. Mary Magdalene wrote in one of those texts, "What is hidden will be revealed, for nothing concealed will fail to come to light." She knew that truth always finds a way. Today, those manuscripts exist. They can be read, and the message remains as dangerous as it was 2,000 years ago, because it continues to say that you do not need intermediaries, that temples are optional, that salvation is not future, it is present awakening, that the true fallen are not demons with horns, but ideas that imprison us, ideas of insufficiency, of separation, of dependence. Jesus waged a war, not against people but against principles, and he lost. But he also planted seeds that time does not erase, because now you know, now you can choose, to continue repeating doctrines or to ask the questions that disturb. The war continues, it always has, and you, whether you want it or not, are already in it.